Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Hello and welcome to this rather festive British Theatre Guide podcast with me, Simon Sladen. Now today I'm very lucky to be speaking to somebody who you may have seen aboard the stage of the National Theatre or in many of those wonderful musicals, Barnum, Me and My Girl. Of course, for some of you, you might know him from Blue Peter or as one of our chief scouts. Of course, Panto is another field in which he's incredibly well known, entertaining audiences across not only the country, but across the world via the wonderful World Wide Web. Today, it's wonderful to welcome Peter Duncan to the British Theatre Guide podcast. Hi, Peter.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much.
Now, Peter, you are a person with Panto very much in your bones, having grown up with it. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how this crazy magical world that takes over our theatres each Christmas came into your life and really, I suppose, your family's lives as well.
Well, it was my parents really who used to were performers and used to put them on. So I my very, very first memory is very much, strange enough, somebody sent me a kind of a good luck sort of Christmas card, and it was of an ice show at the Empress Hall in 1955. One of my first memories. I've got it in front of me here, actually. It's podcast.
Wow.
You can't see it, but there it is. And it was. I remember always going into a very cold room, and I was at a big ice rink, and I was a babe in arms, and I suppose that's my very first sense of the one I'm looking at. It's called Cinderella on Ice at London's Empress Hall. So that was my beginnings really, and then my dad, I think, like a lot of people who put shows on, struggled a bit and lost money and made money, and he even ran the very inappropriate midget town at the Battersea Fun Fair. So for a long time, I was always surrounded by little people. I was quite little myself. So that's my world. And then he got to be a bit more successful, and he got a good the Opera House, lovely Matcham Theatre at Tunbridge Wells, and he started putting pantomimes on there and really had 14, 15 successful seasons. And I suppose that's when he actually started to make a proper living at it, really. And my first experiences on stage were as his stooge. So he'd unlike the meaner producers today, he'd get about 20 kids up on stage, and he'd go down the line and always miss one out, miss the littlest one out. But then he'd pick a boy and a girl, and I'd never let on he was my dad. I was just, and I put my arm around her, and then I'd try and kiss her on the cheek, and all things like that, So and the first time I learned to get laughs, I got that. That was my laugh, and so that was my beginnings, because they were hardworking. My mother did the costumes, and we had garages full of, the sets. He used to have a store at one point, but then there were just cloths then, and we sort of had to get the cloths out every summer to make sure the rats hadn't nibbled them. So that was my childhood, really. I don't know what it would lead to, but that's what they did. I had no intention of doing that stuff, really, or I didn't imagine I would, and I started acting when I was 15, but in a very, very different world to them, really. And my Panto stuff only really started with when Kevin Wood, who was the young producer, in the end, we put on 3 seasons at the Empire, which hadn't had a Panto on for 35 years. So that was almost, oddly, my start in Panto proper.
And so you had that exposure with your family at a young age, and then you've done a number of different theatrical forms, been on the stage at the National, done musical theatre, and of course done telly with Blue Peter and stuff. I mean, that's quite a wide landscape of, I suppose, performance modes, we might call them. Did they all lead into each other? Was there ever a moment when you went, okay, I've done a bit of straight acting, I'm going to go to something else? Or did everything just naturally evolve? Or was Blue Peter one of those points where suddenly you got to do all these amazing feats and then Duncan Dares caves after?
Well, I think I've always been someone who, there's the famous play Long Day's Journey into Night, isn't there, where lots of people keep repeating themselves. And in a sense, I've tried or don't have any interest in doing that. So I suppose creating these online films, I did think this definitely is a slightly new genre here, with a genre that I love and have worked in, but now we're trying to put it on film. I mean, you could argue Disney and everybody else did it earlier on and they nicked everything that way. But I mean, this was, kind of not taking a stage version, but translating the rhythm of pantomime onto film, which I don't think anybody had quite done, but using all the film things you can do with films as well. So to answer your question, I digress, is that, yes, I've always gone from thing to thing, which is probably why I became a Blue Peter presenter. I mean, I had a good career, done films and plays for Today's and all that stuff. And I think if people look down on Blue Peter, which I saw very much as an old variety turn, really, you always get to perform a bit and obviously do bits of journalism and travel, and and it makes you, that live stuff about it is still very theatre orientated. So I think that's probably why I dived into that.
It's also very inspirational, isn't it? I think for most people in the UK growing up watch Blue Peter, and whether that's you do one of the making tasks, and how many thousands of people in the theatre industry today, whether they're prop makers or designers, started out, doing some of that with sticky black plastic, or you see, specifically yours, those wonderful sort of spectacular things that you'd never see generally on television, with that, high risk and excitement, whether people go into becoming fighter pilots or all the rest of it. I mean, it is that, as a wonderful way to describe it, like a living variety show.
Yeah.
And I suppose in a way that opportunity to inspire and engage, and to maybe and to teach, which is of course what the BBC is all about. It's not a million miles away from Panto in terms of that quite important role it can do in teaching good and bad and some of those other themes. I mean, is that something that in your practice, I mean, obviously, because you've been in a number of shows and you've written and directed shows, yours are always very much contemporary, honour the traditions, but don't patronise children at all in the way that they approach some of those contemporary challenges society is facing today?
Now, I agree with you, which is, again, the reason why I kind of went into the scouting thing many years later and sort of nominally ran that organisation. But it was just that idea of being inspirational and a doing thing, really. So even the Panto, the online ones I've done the last 3 years have been very much about the school's educational resources, and you too can make a terrible prop like this. It serves a purpose. It doesn't cost a fortune. So I love the idea of making it certainly performance and creativity accessible. And yes, I am into that world, really, and the educational stuff, particularly with climate change and anything that becomes contemporary, it was always been important, really, and a sort of inclusivity, because so many people have, if you've got lots of money, you come from a richer family, you'll think, well, I'll go into the arts, read all the Sunday papers, all these people. But actually, it's the kids who don't have that anything going on in that background that suddenly, need to break out from maybe a cynical parenting attitude or a dull school or something, So I see myself very much outside the mainstream, which is what Blue Peter was, which is scouting, which I think in some ways the Pantos were, that making that relationship. And I worked with David Wood a lot in the early days. So I generally like, I think the best audience in the world is a silent kids audience of 3 and 4 year olds. God, you've got them if they're listening to you. Listening
and engaged. And I think, I'm just thinking back to, you did, how many seasons did you do at Oxford Playhouse as their resident writer director?
Yes, well, so after I did Hackney with Kevin Wood, and then I I got some Arts Council funding, actually, did a tour of Eric the Viking, which again, was, in those days, they were quite well-funded kids touring productions. And then because of that, I did about 4 or 5 seasons at what's called the Broadway Theatre now. But I suppose the difference with me is I was just left to my own devices. I was always, because if you sound like you're experimental, it sounds like you're sort of diving up your own sort of, you're sort of being pretentious. But it was just doing things a bit differently. Obviously, things like original songs. But I remember working with Ali Pretty one year, who's a fantastic silks designer. We did a whole Peter Pan with silks. And then another year I worked with, I've forgotten his name now, but he designed the Olympics' second designer, really, And you're suddenly working with something that's a bit different. I mean, you've got to be conventional sometimes, but in the genre, Panto genre, I hate it when it's bland and formulaic. I think it kills the spirit, really. So I struggle a bit. So I've had the ability to be free with it, really, and try things a bit differently.
I remember seeing your Beauty and the Beast with this sort of villainous CCTV camera with the sort of laser beam, the evil eye looking over everyone, which, the kids went crazy for, because every time that laser came out, they were like, oh, is it going to get you? But also, I mean, is it reading too much into it? It's another one of those themes of, Big Brother watching everybody, and is that the evil? I suppose audiences read into them what they like. And were you a bit surprised about, how some might say how energetic certain areas of the press were after your Jack and the Beanstalk in Pool, which had reference to Greta Thunberg and environmentalism, which of course for Jack and the Beanstalk has been in that narrative for many, many, many a decade because of the wonderful nature of it's all about the environment and the beanstalk. But did that take you back at all, how the press sort of reacted?
Not really, because anybody who produces shows and wants to get people in, we have to trying to explain to the theatre sometimes that even bad press is good press because you're being talked about, but sometimes they see it as the opposite to that. But that was just the woke culture of Piers Morgan and Toby, forgotten his second name now, wanting to make up a story that I'd gone all woke. In fact, actually, I was doing the opposite. I was kind of making fun of it, but in a way that the kids, because they obviously are the driving force along with Greta behind it all, it was actually having a bit of fun with it, really. So it wasn't woke culture at all.
Parody, satire, all part of it, but also that. So what we were talking about earlier, the opportunity to talk about important or I suppose even sort of political aspects in pantomime. And let's turn now to your fleet, one might say, of online pantos. This the year we've got the third of them, haven't we, with Pantoland. But let's go back to. I sort of don't like saying it, back to the pandemic at the beginning. And obviously it was a very difficult time for theatres, weren't allowed to perform, and planning, we didn't know what was going to be happening in those festive seasons. So when did this wonderful idea come into your mind to think, how are we going to keep the panto spirit alive, and how can we use technology, which we sort of all forget that we're now so used to Zoom and WhatsApp chatting and video calls. But even at the beginning of the pandemic, that type of broadcast or capture or delivery mechanism seemed a million years away.
Well, I knew we had, the streamers always seemed like a sophisticated, everybody's turning into streamers now, of course, but even back then, you only had the big ones that invested great sums of money into producing product for their own streams for you to get on their streams and the advertising that they're made from it. Of course, anybody can stream. It's so you can provide it's an open platform to providing any entertainment, and it's just how you might do that. So for me, that idea was always there, and I made the odd TV program myself, and I'd always been into filming and visual stuff. But I did go to lots of friends and said, look, I've kind of got this idea about, and I think I was thinking about doing it on my, a good iPhone initially, because I know films have been made on iPhones. I thought, and I had got kit, but I didn't imagine I'd be hiring a crew. And so it's just interesting about ideas, isn't it? That if you have an idea and you start doing it, and the idea is that idea can either take off it or it just disappears, or you forget about it the next day. And I think over the years, I've always learned that you keep plugging away at it because you don't see the outcome for it. So I had a mate who was a drummer, but also a great cameraman. And my pal in Talbot up the road, was really supportive. And then lots of people were obviously not working because there wasn't any work about. The energy that came into it from other people. And I always remember the funniest thing was I was thinking, all right, so it's got to all be original. So I've got to write some, I'll find somebody to write a song, because everybody was running around sort of not knowing what to do. I said to this person I knew, I said, would you mind writing a song? It's kind of getting there. So I thought, well, I've got to write the songs because, and I've got to make that prop, because in the end, the time was becoming less and less. And we just kind of dived in with it, really. But we wanted at that point to do it properly. And I went to my neighbour who's got a long garden like me and an old folly in it, and that became the Giant's Lair. And I hired an old panto giant and winched him off the tree. But then I got a good music. So the reason we tried to do it properly was because even then I thought, all right, I can do mimic the panto stuff on stage, but also I know I can get some good, if it's a good story, you can get some intimate scenes that are well acted and close up, and you don't have to always project it out. And that worked quite well. But we got this footage together, and we're thinking, oh, this looks pretty good. But, still no idea whether anybody would see it, or let alone buy it. And we, by chance, through my sister, who I used to teach, the MD of Everyman Cinemas, she used to teach her Pilates, and she mentioned that, my brother's just made a film. Oh, really? Oh, there's nothing much in the cinema. She mentioned it to a chap called Paul Wise, who ran the Everyman Cinemas, and we took our footage to him, which on the big screen looked pretty good. And he said, yes, well, I think we'll put that out at Christmas. So that's how it went from also being streamed. It went online. And I'd always planned to try and do school stuff as well, because I thought that might work, and families. But I never imagined the amount of publicity that, people, when I bump into people now, they don't say so much, oh, you're the Blue Peter Man, you're the bloke that put those online pantomimes on. And then everybody kind of got into it the following year, and we did a big production the following year, which was great fun to do, but probably a bit too bold circumstances.
Because you kicked off with Jack and the Beanstalk, didn't you? And then you did Cinderella. But I mean, it sounds, they're so warm, and there's a great sort of family feel, and all sort of making it together, and that warmth so comes across. I just also have these wonderful visions in my head of you like winching the giant, or you as Dame Trot in the trees with the balloons. Like, did your neighbours wonder what was going on? Obviously, like, they were lending you spaces, but I just thought that must have been such a wonderful vista at summer. Because when did you film them during that?
They tended to be filmed in the summer because you had to, really. But the problem with making films is, of course, post-production is quite complicated, especially if it's going to go into cinemas, because all the Foley, all the sound, the tracks, and we did do the vocals primarily live, because I wanted to. I remember going to see the new West Side Story, which I loved visually, but I just thought, you're not singing. Nobody's that. You can see it in their voice and it's mimed, And I remember La La Land had that opening number, and that was all sung live. I thought, well, we're going to stick with this live singing, because we used Brittany mics and all that, and all kind of stuff. So will they want? Will they mind? There's a Brittany mic, So it was lots of decisions to make, really, about the genre. And then I just went for the interaction stuff and made sure that pretty much the timing was right. And of course, until I sat in the cinema and at school hall, did I realize, oh, why that one worked, because people like to say his pantomimes for the theatre. Well, yes, it is, but it's clearly also, kids aren't making that. They're just reacting to characters, and it's talk back, your interaction. It's like sing-along cinema, but it's shout-along cinema, so.
Yeah, and it's, television for young people and kids TV do that all the time with direct address, just as you do in Panto, and it you equally join in. And I loved as well, you still keeping the sing along at the end, and we had a little Razzle Bull, which was lovely. And it must have been quite something to be in that school hall and hear everybody sort of screaming at the top of their voices at those sections. I mean, it's lovely to have, as you said, those 3 and 4 year olds listening attentively, but also that vibrancy from, as you said, people who might think Panto doesn't translate well. And of course, historically, there have been Pantos broadcast on television throughout history, and radio Pantos. So it does work, doesn't it?
Well, some of them don't, no, because I think they often get people who don't, I say respect the genre, but some of those big telly Panto things have usually been various celebs just trolling up and doing their own bit. And of course, they always forget the narrative, and they think it's a romp. They don't realize that telling stories is very much part of it, and you believing in the love story and the characters, and the fact that the baddie gets the comeuppance, and they're quite sophisticated, some of the stories, really. And I think in the last one, I obviously wanted to shift a bit, so I do tell a frighteningly long story at the start of it, basically about a dictator and a revolutionary with a visionary kind of character. And I thought, everybody said, well, you can't make it that long, but the other day I went into school, and when they're listening, draws them in, and it works. So I was trying to do a slightly different genre this time a bit, and be a bit braver again with it, really. But because sometimes pantos, live pantos, they're so scared to sit still for a minute. I mean, people are on and off and quick, you know. It is what we used to say, a bit Butlins, isn't it? That you just have to keep it up and keep it moving and don't ever stop. And it's like people have forgotten the fact, actually, if you're telling a good story, people, they will listen if you can draw them in, you know.
Yeah, sometimes those shows, I think we've all sat in the audience where it feels like a constant onslaught of energy and you feel exhausted by the end of the first act. But also you don't, on reflection, you don't really care for any of the characters because there hasn't been any nuance. It's been 100% all the time. And like any good story, we want that light and shade. We want we want to get to know characters. We want to know, okay, this is the romance narrative, which will be a bit softer, or here's the quest section where we're doing that. And I think what works really nicely in your pantos for Panto Online is that because you've done them on location and they're there, we're not some of those TV shows where the cameras are in the theatre and you're watching an audience watching the show. You do feel 2 times removed, but with yours you don't, because the characters are on location. I mean, they are in the dairy, or they're in, those places, which is great fun. And I also love the fact you could go really messy with the slosh scenes and things like that, which must have been, did you just do one take because of washing all of the clothes or things? But that must have been fun to be doing.
We had a lot of buckets, but unlike 3 shows a day malarkey, my thing about slosh is that when I'm either doing a slosh or I'm in a slosh, you just check, every performance, see the levels go down and down and down. And the whole point, you've got to fill it to the top, because that's the point of it,
But that fun certainly comes across. So let's talk a little bit about the one that is new for this year. And of course, people listening, you can still watch Cinderella and Jack and the Beanstalk. They're still available to enjoy. But we've got a new title, Pantoland, which, as you said, is a little bit different because it's sort of a number of different things, isn't it? A bit like a big panto variety show. So there's the story. We've got some of the other narratives in there. How do you describe it to everyone?
Well, I thought I'd find a generic title, and then I thought I'd pick other bits from other pantos and try and weave them in together. I mean, for all my philosophy about narrative, it doesn't, apart from a set-alone story, which has a narrative and there's quite a good story, a puppet thing in. There's quite a lot of puppets in this one, really, which when they joined the cast, I didn't imagine they'd have such a large role, but they were better than a lot.
I do love the puppet panto. We won't reveal what the title is, but there is a wonderful moment where they put on a mini panto themselves, don't they?
Yes. And it was funny because I was with my sister and brother-in-law who I don't even know, there's a sort of water park sequence. That's very much there, where they've got a little boat there. And of course, we were laughing that I'm surprised how much of what I would call the improvised dialogue remains in it, where you walk towards somebody, you say something, they say something back, or somebody shouts at you. I'm absolutely surprised how much of that was better than the more contrived stuff, So I'm a great disruptor. I love the idea that to retain that idea of spontaneity and not, because people are often fearful on stage, and that often when it can go too far, where there's too much of it, and you constantly end up, get bored by the spontaneity. But as long as it's in a kind of a structure, spontaneity can be wonderful, and the audience know it's that moment, And they also know, I think, deep down, that when it's a contrived, that was a mistake. It just falls like lead to me when those happen,
Yeah, I think you are potentially the only ever paddleboarding day. That whole sequence is just wonderful, and it makes you think that would be to do a comedy sequence in a panto in a theatre using that, or you've got the speedboat being pulled along and stuff, which is just very, very
a lot of that
hilarious and fun.
The physical stuff came because I did a musical years ago played Chaplin in a musical called The Little Tramp, and I've also done a very good play called Stan and Ollie playing Stan and Laura, and so I've always had this great fascination for the old flickers, really. And of course the cycle repeats itself, because in those days, all those guys left for variety, got on the boats, and they became famous, but by using the skills they learned on stage. So I often thought, if I had to take it to a stage further, I would probably do more of that kind of slapstick stuff, because it comes from the stage and it ended up on film. And, for these strange 3 years, I've sort of repeated that a bit, really.
Yeah, and obviously you did many spectacular stunts and scary things on Blue Peter and Duncan Dares, and of course learning the tightrope walk in Barnum is also no mean feat, I'm sure, to do.
Well, I did one of my dares was being a high wire walker with tricks and things. And so I had that skill in the bank, really. But obviously, I did do a Barnum one of where it was circus. We did it in a circus tent, and it sadly closed after 11 performances with great debt, mainly down to the dodgy producers. But I was doing a thing called a cloud swing in that, which was really a real stunt. Can't get that one wrong. So there won't be any more shows. So I mean, yeah, I've always. I think they're trying to. I mean, health and safety now is a nightmare because people don't want you to do it. I mean, it's ridiculous for a circus artist. They say, "Well, you've got to have. I can't have a safety wire because I can't do my act with a safety wire." I mean, the only time you see a circus act is with a safety wire because actually they're not quite on top of it. But you go and see like Gifford Circus, it still has that spirit of the old daring do with Tweedy and the like, and people who are tough, physical, slapstick performers. It's like being a little Argentinian football. You've got to be super strong, but also imaginative.
Yeah, that wonderful sense of also everyone together. Look, in those moments, that is anticipation, and I suppose it comes back to as well the thrill of the live and that acknowledgement of us being in a community, and we're all people, and the mixture of the ordinary and extraordinary, of doing ordinary things in an extraordinary way, or extraordinary things the other way around. I also love the fact that for me, watching the latest version, and I don't know if this is because you were using parts that things that you had and putting them in the show where you were reflecting on some of those other things. Like there's a very famous suit that appears,
yes.
Which was part of that. I mean, I didn't know how that might have felt, letting somebody else wearing that with the wig.
Yeah, that was half my son. So he's now a chef, but he did. He does become a bit like me. It becomes a little bit of a family affair, and they all. I always think they're backing off, saying no, but he was very open to it. So he I mean, I say he doesn't work as an actor, but maybe he was thinking, I was an actor for a little while when I was young. Maybe I should carry on.
Wow, now he is a film star in your show there. And also, I love to hear again. I've never had a mother smee, because that's from your Peter Pan, isn't it?
Yeah, we did. We sort of lifted that and changed the lyrics a bit. But we did, yes, when I used to do those Lewisham pantos, we used to try and write original songs. Oh, I might have done that in a one-man show. I can't quite remember really. But you like everybody, you tend to regurgitate material and adjust it, particularly in music, because it's people don't often know, but you can use all pop songs, and of course that works really well. But it's such a lovely thing to try and create music. You're producing a musical basically, but you're not really calling it that. You're just it's meant to be seamless.
But it's also watching the latest version. We see all the many strings to your amazing talented bow, which is so wonderful to see. You doing the Dave and directing and doing all that, and then Hook. But that that song in particular is really tender and goes back to what we were saying earlier about the character doesn't have to be on one track the whole time. Yeah. The more 3D you make it, the more you pull into it. And for many people, especially younger viewers of it, they won't necessarily know all of that wonderful history, but it's just as valid, and they might go off and be inspired to do some of those other things, which is so wonderful to see, and must be very proud to see the final thing to come together, and to know that it's going to bring a lot of joy for people that can watch it whenever, or with their colleagues at school, or with their friends at school, or you must get loads of lovely letters from families that maybe on Christmas Day watch it before or after Christmas Pud, and it becomes a sort of tradition of togetherness.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a community now of schools and families that have watched before. So one's almost got I wouldn't call it a business model exactly, but it's quite nice. And of course, when you haven't got an overseeing, you're in charge of your own creativity. You're not being forced into places that make you uncomfortable. So I've enjoyed that. Creative freedom to do that, which is also equally dangerous when you get pretentious or you're not you're unsure, sometimes. But certainly what you just said about narrative and telling stories is trying to do it a bit differently, but still retain the heart of it and soul of it, really. Yeah.
So will we get a new title next year? What's 2023 going to bring for you, Peter, in mixing it up and doing some more exciting things?
It is a bit of a dilemma. I went to the Panto yesterday, actually, and it's so lovely to see it back and see theatres full again, and it's back to its old spirit. But I suppose in my heart of hearts, I've been now corrupted by making films, and I can't see. It's very hard if I am indeed an independent producer, it's very hard to find dates because lots have taken them up by friends of mine, Paul Hendy and Chris Jordan, and obviously there's the big Panto producer as well. So to find a good date as an independent producer, you have to usually go to a repertory or a good independent theatre, but then they've got their own artistic. So it's a bit of it's a difficult one, because I'd love to go back and do something, get something new on stage again. But I suspect I may just stick with trying to tell stories that, and maybe they won't quite be pantomimes. Maybe it'll slip into a sort of more, I'd say Disney-esque, because I don't mean that either, because I think they tend to be a bit bland sometimes and terrible sometimes. They think they can get all the comedy and all the caricatures right, and that doesn't work, and they forget to tell a story, But so there's something about that territory on film, and maybe interactive, but it would have to be. I have learned since the Cinderella one, which I sort of self-distributed. It's a tricky game trying to go into cinemas with all, imagine trying to put Cinderella on against Avatar. You're not going to succeed, because you get it's like a tsunami washes over you, you disappear. But it's quite fun, that territory, really. And if you get it right, and films more than theatre sometimes can have a breakout and be successful because they're a bit different. To answer your questions, Simon, I'm not absolutely sure what I'll be up to, really, but as long as I can jump around a bit and do a good pratfall, I'll still be at it, I suppose.
Well, we will hold you to that, Peter, of jumping around and seeing her doing these wonderful, pratfalls. And of course, we can watch all three of Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella, and this year's Pantoland. Maybe have a visit, if you're listening, to pantoonline.co.uk, where you can find all of that information on Peter's wonderful pantos ready to stream, and also you can read all about his wonderful career on there as well.
All
Peter,
for £15, I might add, which was part of the cost of living idea, was that actually it's certainly. One of the ideas was to do a extra one, because it still ain't cheap to go to theatres and things, and so it's very much directed at people suddenly going, well, what are we going to do? We can't afford the scouts or the family to go to, and just getting there with the train. So it was a choice that actually there'll be a lot of people that might want this.
So this Christmas, if you fancy shouting "It's Behind You," singing along, or watching a hilarious slosh scene, I can thoroughly recommend choosing one or more of those marvellous titles. Peter, it's been such a delight to talk to you today. Thank you so much. A very Merry Christmas to you. And we will look out for 2023 to see what the future might hold from another wonderful piece of art from yourself. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.